The massive space station hung in the void like a glittering jewel, its crystal spires reaching out in all directions. Veltar Prime had been neutral ground for over 1,000 years, where species from across the galaxy could meet without fear of war or conquest. Today, representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered in the great amphitheater, their strange forms creating a living rainbow of evolution. Some looked like walking trees with silver bark, others resembled giant butterflies, with wings that shimmered like oil on water. There were beings made of pure energy contained in mechanical suits, and creatures that seemed to be living rock formations with glowing eyes. The air buzzed with translation devices working overtime, converting thousands of different languages into something everyone could understand. At the center of it all stood Elder Ketharos, one of the last remaining Zephyrians. His people were old, older than most civilizations in the galaxy. His body looked like it was carved from living crystal, constantly shifting between blue and purple hues. Light pulsed through his form in complex patterns, a language that most species had forgotten how to read. The elder raised what might have been an arm, and the massive chamber fell silent. Even the youngest species showed respect for the Zephyrians. They had been exploring space when most worlds were still covered in primitive slime. "My friends," Ketharos began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic design, "I come before you today to speak of an old warning, one that my people have guarded for over 50,000 years." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. 50,000 years was ancient history, even by galactic standards. Most species had barely discovered fire that long ago. "There is a world," the elder continued, "in a small yellow star system on the outer rim of the galaxy. The locals call it Earth. The species there calls themselves humans." Commander Velkar of the Draknari Empire let out a loud snort. He was a typical Draknari, standing nearly 3 meters tall with scales that looked like polished black metal. His people had conquered 17 star systems in the last century alone, and they weren't known for their patience with old stories. "Humans," Velkar's voice boomed through the chamber. "Those primitive apes? They barely know how to leave their own atmosphere. Half their planet is still fighting with chemical weapons and metal bullets." Other representatives began to chuckle. Everyone knew about the humans. They were one of the youngest species to achieve basic spaceflight, and they hadn't even managed to colonize their own solar system properly yet. Their technology was laughably primitive compared to most galactic civilizations. Elder Ketharos waited for the laughter to die down before continuing. His crystal form pulsed brighter, a sign of deep concern among his people. "The protocols are clear," he said firmly. "No contact, no interference, no provocation of any kind. These rules were written in the blood of civilizations that no longer exist." "Protocols written by cowards," Velkar interrupted, his massive form rising from his seat. "The Draknari Empire spans 3 galactic arms. We have fleets that could glass entire planets. What possible threat could these humans pose?" The chamber erupted in agreement. Young species always thought they knew better than their elders. The Corvan collective buzzed their approval through their hive speakers. The merchant princes of the Velthari nodded their serpentine heads. Even the peaceful ethereals seemed to agree that the old warnings were outdated. Elder Ketharos watched this display with growing sadness. He had seen this before, though not in his lifetime. The records spoke of other species who had dismissed the warnings, who had thought themselves too advanced or too powerful to worry about primitive humans. "How you speak of fleets and weapons," the elder said quietly, but his words carried to every corner of the chamber. "You measure strength in ships and soldiers. But tell me, Commander Velkar, how do you fight an enemy that turns your own strength against you? How do you conquer a species that refuses to stay conquered?" Velkar laughed, a harsh sound like grinding metal. "Old fool, you speak in riddles. Humans haven't even developed faster than light travel. They send little metal cans filled with fuel to reach their own moon. Their most advanced weapons are barely capable of cracking stone." The elder's form dimmed with what his people called deep sorrow. "The archives speak of humans who once walked among the stars, warriors who fought in the great wars before the formation of this very council. They were different then, but they were still human." "Myths and legends," another voice called out. It was diplomat Zethana from the Core Worlds Alliance. Stories told to frighten children. If these humans were ever spacefaring, where are their ruins? Where are their colonies? Where is any evidence of this great threat you speak of? Ketharos had no answer that would satisfy them. The records were fragmentary, and much had been lost to time, but the warnings remained, passed down through 50 millennia of careful guardianship. The vote was swift and decisive. The ancient protocols regarding Earth and its human inhabitants were officially abandoned. Commander Velkar was granted salvage rights to the Outer Sol system, and the Draknari Empire began planning their resource extraction operation. As the council dispersed, Elder Ketharos remained alone in the great chamber. His crystal form pulsed with the slow, sad rhythm of his people's mourning songs. He had done his duty, delivered the warning as his ancestors had instructed, but like so many young species before them, the council had chosen to learn the hard. Way in the depths of space, automated monitoring stations began detecting unusual activity in the Sol system. The humans, it seemed, were not as primitive as everyone believed. The Draknari warfleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a pack of metal predators. 50 massive ships, each one larger than anything humans had ever built, their black hulls gleaming with weapon ports and shield generators. Admiral Zethmol stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bone Crusher, watching the primitive human settlements through his tactical displays. "Look at them," he sneered to his officers. "Tiny metal boxes floating around their gas giant. Mining stations that barely qualify as space habitats. This will be over in hours." The Draknari had done their research. Human technology was pathetic by galactic standards. Their fastest ships used chemical rockets that took months to travel between planets. Their weapons were crude kinetic projectiles and primitive nuclear devices. Most of their population still lived on their home planet, completely defenseless against orbital bombardment. What the Draknari didn't know was that Admiral Kim Tae-ho had been expecting them. Kim stood in the command center of Ceres Station, watching the alien fleet through telescopes and radar arrays. He was a small man by human standards, barely reaching the shoulder of most Draknari soldiers, but his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had spent decades planning for this exact moment. "Captain Park," he said quietly to the woman beside him, "signal all stations. Operation Hornet's Nest is now active." Captain Park Sojin nodded and began issuing orders. She had been Kim's second-in-command for 15 years, ever since they had both served in the Earth Coalition Navy. Back then, they had been preparing for wars between human nations. Now they faced something far worse. The Draknari fleet moved into the asteroid belt with casual arrogance. Admiral Zethmol's plan was simple: destroy any human installations, claim the valuable asteroids and moons, then demand Earth's surrender. Standard conquest protocol for primitive species. That's when the first surprise hit them. The mining ship Busan Miner had been working the same asteroid for 3 months. To Draknari sensors, it looked like a harmless civilian vessel. But when it suddenly changed course and accelerated directly toward the Draknari cruiser Night Stalker, the aliens finally realized something was wrong. Captain Lee Dongwoo had volunteered for this mission. His ship wasn't really a miner anymore. The cargo holds had been filled with every piece of radioactive waste the humans could gather. The fusion reactor had been rigged to overload on impact. As his ship screamed toward the enemy cruiser, Lee spoke calmly into his radio. "Tell my wife I love her. Tell Earth we're not going quietly." The impact vaporized both ships in a ball of nuclear fire. Before the Draknari could react, more civilian ships began changing course. Cargo haulers that had been modified into kinetic weapons, research vessels carrying experimental bombs, even passenger ships whose crews had volunteered to ram enemy vessels rather than surrender. "What are they doing?" Zethmol roared at his tactical officer. "These aren't military vessels." "Sir, they appear to be... Sir, they're using civilian ships as weapons. All of them are on collision courses." In the depths of space, Commander Park, Minho watched the chaos through his periscope. His submarine had been designed for Earth's oceans, but human engineers had modified it for space operations. The dark sea drifted silently between asteroids, invisible to Draknari sensors that were designed to detect energy signatures and metal hulls. "Fire torpedo spread," Park ordered. The weapons that launched from his ship didn't look like advanced alien technology. They were simple nuclear warheads strapped to chemical rockets, technology that humans had been perfecting for over a century. But they worked perfectly fine for punching holes in alien hulls. Admiral Zethmol watched his fleet take casualties from enemies that shouldn't exist. These humans were fighting with salvaged mining equipment and modified cargo ships. Their weapons were primitive and crude, but they kept coming wave after wave using tactics that no civilized species would ever consider. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human commander." "Put it through," Zethmol snarled. Admiral Kim Tae-ho's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired but determined, the kind of man who had made peace with difficult decisions long ago. "I am Admiral Kim Tae-ho of the Earth Defense Force," said simply. "You have entered our territory without permission and attacked our people. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Zethmol laughed. "Human, your pathetic fleet is already broken. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick." Kim's expression didn't change. "We don't surrender. Then you will die." "Maybe," Kim admitted. But not alone and not quietly. The battle continued for 6 hours. The Draknari had superior technology, better shields, and more powerful weapons. But the humans had something the aliens couldn't understand: absolute refusal to give up. When Captain Park So-jin's cruiser lost its engines, she used the ship's remaining momentum to ram a Draknari destroyer. When Lieutenant Commander Yoon Jae-sung ran out of missiles, he piloted his fighter directly into an enemy command bridge. When the mining station Sejong-bas was about to be destroyed, its crew overloaded their fusion reactor and took 3 Draknari ships with them. By the end of the battle, the Draknari had lost 15 ships and over 10,000 crew members. The humans had lost nearly everything, but somehow they were still fighting. Admiral Zethmol stood in his damaged command center, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. His mighty fleet, which had conquered 17 star systems, had been mauled by primitive humans using modified mining equipment. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "long-range sensors are detecting more human ships approaching from the inner system." "How many?" "Unknown, sir. They're using some kind of stealth technology we can't identify." Zethmol realized with growing horror that this wasn't a battle anymore. It was a trap. The humans had been ready for them, had planned for this exact scenario. And if they were willing to use civilian ships as weapons, what other surprises were waiting in the inner system? For the first time in his military career, Admiral Zethmol gave the order to retreat. As the Draknari fleet limped away toward hyperspace, Admiral Kim Tae-ho sat in his damaged command center and smiled grimly. They had won the first round, but he knew this was just the beginning. The aliens would be back, and next time they would be ready for human tactics. But humans were very good at learning new tricks. Emperor Grakthos had ruled the Draknari Empire for over 2 centuries. In all that time, no primitive species had ever humiliated his forces the way the humans had. The defeat at Sol System wasn't just a military loss, it was a threat to his entire empire. If word spread that humans could destroy Draknari fleets, other species might start getting ideas about rebellion. 3 full battle fleets, he commanded from his throne room on the capital world of Draktar. "I want every human world burned to ash. Make an example of them that will echo across the galaxy for 1,000 years." His generals bowed low, their scaled heads touching the polished floor. Fleet Admiral Corvinus, the Empire's greatest military mind, stepped forward. "My Emperor, intelligence suggests the humans have been preparing for our return. Should we perhaps reconsider a direct assault?" Grakthos's eyes blazed with fury. "Are you questioning my judgment, Admiral?" "Never, my lord. But these humans fight differently than other species. They don't follow the accepted rules of warfare." "Then we will teach them the rules," the Emperor snarled, "with fire and death." What Emperor Grakthos didn't know was that Captain Choi Min-ho was already behind enemy lines. Choi's ship, the New Soul, had been traveling through space for over 40 years. It was one of dozens of generation ships that Earth had launched. Back when humans first discovered they weren't alone in the universe, most people thought these ships were failed colony attempts, lost causes that would never reach their destinations. They were wrong. The new Sol had been drifting silently through Draknari space for decades, its crew living in suspended animation, waiting for the signal to wake up. When the first reports of the Sol system battle reached Earth, encrypted messages went out to every sleeper ship scattered across the galaxy. Choi woke up to find himself deep in enemy territory, exactly where he was supposed to be. "Status report," he said to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Park Ji-won, as the crew slowly emerged from their hibernation pods. "We're in the Velkar system, sir. Major Draknari supply depot on the third planet. Military shipyard in orbit." "Perfect target," Choi smiled grimly. The new Sol looked like a harmless cargo vessel from the outside, but its holds were packed with enough nuclear devices to level a small moon. More importantly, its crew had spent 40 years planning for this exact mission. "Signal the other ships," Choi ordered. "Operation Ghost Strike begins now." Across Draknari space, 37 sleeper ships suddenly came alive. They had been hiding in asteroid fields, drifting among space debris, masquerading as derelict. Hulks for decades. Now they revealed their true purpose. The attack on the Velkar supply depot was swift and brutal. The new Sol simply flew straight into the orbital shipyard and detonated its entire payload. The explosion destroyed not only the shipyard, but also 17 military vessels that were being repaired there. Similar attacks struck throughout the Empire. Captain Kim So-young's ship, the Daegu Express, eliminated a fuel processing station that supplied an entire sector fleet. Commander Lee Jun-sik destroyed a communications hub that left 12 star systems unable to coordinate their defenses. But the psychological warfare was even more devastating. Major Han Yu-jin had been studying Draknari culture for 20 years, learning everything about their society, their fears, their weaknesses. She knew that Draknari were proud warriors who valued honor above everything else. They couldn't understand an enemy that refused to fight honorably. Her first broadcast went out on all Draknari communication channels. It showed footage from the Sol system battle, but edited to make the human attacks look even more savage than they actually were. She added fake scenes of humans torturing captured Draknari prisoners, humans eating alien flesh, humans performing ritual sacrifices. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. The broadcasts were so convincing that Draknari soldiers began to panic at the mere mention of humans. "They are not warriors," Han's voice said over the broadcasts. "They are monsters that wear the faces of civilization. They cannot be reasoned with. They cannot be defeated through honor. They fight like rabid animals, and they will consume everything in their path." The psychological campaign worked better than anyone expected. Draknari morale collapsed across multiple sectors. Soldiers began deserting rather than face the terrifying humans. Some colonies evacuated entirely when they heard rumors that human ships had been spotted in nearby systems. Emperor Grakthos grew desperate. If conventional warfare wouldn't work against these savage humans, then he would use the Empire's most terrible weapon. "Deploy the Red Death," he ordered his scientists. The Red Death was a bioweapon that the Draknari had developed but never used. It was designed to target specific genetic markers in enemy species, spreading like a plague, but only affecting the targeted population. The weapon was so terrible that even the Draknari considered it too horrific for normal warfare. But these weren't normal circumstances. Dr. Yoon Hai-won was working in her laboratory aboard the research station Hidden Valley when the first reports came in. Draknari forces had released biological weapons against human colonies in the Outer Rim. The weapon was spreading rapidly and early. Reports suggested it was specifically designed to target human DNA. Dr. Yoon had been preparing for this possibility for years. As soon as Earth learned about alien civilizations, human scientists began developing countermeasures for potential biological attacks. They knew that any species advanced enough for interstellar travel would also be capable of creating devastating weapons. "How long until we can develop a cure?" asked Admiral Kim Tae-ho over the secure communication link. "A cure?" Dr. Yoon laughed coldly. "Admiral, I'm not interested in developing a cure. I'm going to make them regret ever hearing the word bioweapon working." Around the clock, Dr. Yoon's team reverse-engineered the Draknari weapon, but instead of just creating a defense, they improved on the original design. The new weapon was faster spreading, more virulent, and specifically tailored to target Draknari physiology. The first test came when Captain Oh Min-jung's stealth ship infiltrated a Draknari military base. Instead of explosives, her team deployed Dr. Yoon's biological weapon in the base's air recycling system. Within days, the entire base was infected. But this wasn't like human diseases that simply killed their victims. The modified weapon turned infected Draknari into carriers who compulsively sought out other members of their species to infect. They became living biological weapons, spreading the plague wherever they went. The infected Draknari didn't die quickly. Instead, they lost the ability to think clearly while retaining just enough awareness to know what was happening to them. They became walking nightmares, desperate to find help but unable to control their compulsion to spread the infection. Soon, entire Draknari colonies were begging for human assistance, willing to surrender unconditionally if the humans would just make the plague stop. But the humans had learned from their enemies. There was no mercy, no negotiation, no honorable surrender. Emperor Grakthos watched his empire crumble from within as his own biological weapon turned against him. The humans hadn't just defeated his forces, they had transformed his greatest weapon into his greatest weakness. For the first time in his long reign, the emperor began to understand what Elder Ketharos had been trying to warn them about. These humans weren't just another species to be conquered. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors who had learned to fight dirty in a galaxy that thought it understood the rules of war. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The mighty Draknari Empire, conquerors of 17 star systems, was losing a war against primitive humans. At first, most species didn't believe the reports. How could creatures who barely knew how to leave their home planet defeat one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces? But the evidence was impossible to ignore. Lieutenant Colonel Kim Ji-hoon stood in the ruins of what had once been a Draknari fortress on the planet Kethvar. The world was a nightmare of toxic gases and acid rain, the kind of place where most species would die in minutes without full environmental suits. But Kim and his soldiers were working in basic protective gear, moving through the poisonous atmosphere like it was just another day at the office. "Sir," Sergeant Lee Min-jae reported, pulling off his breathing mask, "we've secured the armory. The Draknari abandoned enough weapons to supply 3 human battalions." Kim nodded, studying the tactical display on his wrist computer. Kethvar was supposed to be an impregnable fortress world. The Draknari had chosen it specifically because the environment was so hostile that no attacking force could survive long enough to mount an effective assault. They hadn't counted on humans. "The thing about humans," Kim explained to his officers, as they surveyed their conquered prize, "is that we come from a world that's been trying to kill us for millions of years. Toxic atmosphere. We've been breathing polluted air in our cities for decades. Acid rain. Our ancestors survived ice ages and volcanic winters. Hostile environment. We call it Tuesday." The Draknari defenders had retreated to their environmental bunkers, thinking they could wait out the human assault. But Kim's forces had simply adapted. They modified their equipment using salvaged alien technology, learned to work in the toxic environment, and turned the planet's hostile nature into a weapon. Colonel Park Min-soo's Biological Warfare Division wants a sample of the local microorganisms, Lieutenant Yoon Hae-jin reported. Apparently, some of the native bacteria show promise for their next project. Kim smiled grimly. Colonel Park had become something of a legend among human forces. His engineered plagues had turned entire Draknari sectors into quarantine zones. But more importantly, his work had proven something that terrified the rest of the galaxy. Humans didn't just adapt to survive, they adapted to win. Across the galaxy, species that had previously ignored the human-Draknari conflict began to pay attention. The peaceful ethereal collective called for emergency sessions to discuss the human problem. The merchant guilds of the Korth hegemony started calculating profit margins on both sides of the war. But it was Elder Ketharos who finally revealed the truth that everyone had been trying to ignore. The ancient Zephyrian appeared before another emergency council session, his crystal form dimmer than before, pulsing with the slow rhythm of deep sorrow. In his Hands he carried data crystals that looked older than most civilizations. "I have been searching through the deepest archives," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. "Records that my people sealed away 50,000 years ago, hoping they would never need to be opened again." Representative Veltari of the Core Worlds Alliance leaned forward in her seat. "What kind of records, Elder?" "Employment contracts," Ketharos replied simply. "Payment vouchers, military service records, evidence of humans serving as mercenaries in the great wars that shaped our galaxy." The chamber erupted in disbelief. Humans as galactic mercenaries. The species had barely achieved spaceflight a few decades ago. "Impossible," declared Ambassador Zethkol of the Merchant Princes. "Humans are primitives. They haven't even colonized their own solar system properly." Elder Ketharos activated the ancient data crystals, and holographic displays filled the chamber. The images showed humanoid figures in advanced combat armor, fighting alongside and against species that most of the current council had never heard of. "The Vekthari hegemony hired human mercenaries to suppress a rebellion in the Outer Rim," Ketharos read from the records. "Payment, 3,000 tons of refined metals and full salvage rights to enemy equipment. Warning notation, human forces. Demonstrated extreme adaptability and unconventional tactics. Recommend against extended contracts due to unpredictable behavior patterns." More records appeared. Humans fighting in toxic nebula environments where other species couldn't survive. Humans learning enemy technologies in the middle of battles, and turning captured weapons against their former owners. Humans displaying what the records called pack bonding behavior that made them incredibly difficult to break or defeat. The Zalgorian Empire, another record stated, terminated their contract with human mercenary companies after discovering that the humans had learned to reverse engineer Zalgorian biotechnology and were developing superior versions of their employer's own weapons. Captain Park So-jin, who had been monitoring galactic communications from her command ship, listened to the council broadcasts with growing amusement. The aliens were finally starting to understand what they were dealing with, but I didn't get the full picture. "Lieutenant Commander Choi Yu-jin," she called to her intelligence officer, "what's our current status on captured alien technology?" "We've reverse-engineered their shield generators, improved their weapon designs, and figured out how to manufacture their faster-than-light drives," Choi replied. "Dr. Lim Jae-young's team says they can probably improve on the original alien specifications within 6 months. And our biological warfare division. Colonel Park Min-soo reports that they've successfully weaponized 17 different alien pathogens. The latest version specifically targets the genetic markers found in Draknari royal bloodlines." Back, in the council chamber, Elder Ketharos was revealing the most disturbing records of all. "The humans didn't just serve as mercenaries," he said quietly. "They learned from every employer, adapted to every environment, absorbed the knowledge and technology of dozens of civilizations. By the end of the mercenary period, they had become so dangerous that the major powers of the time formed an alliance specifically to drive them away." "What happened to them?" asked Representative Morgak of the Hive Worlds. "They disappeared," Ketharos replied. "The records suggest they chose exile rather than conquest. They found a remote star system on the galactic rim and voluntarily isolated themselves from the rest of civilization." The implication hit the council like a physical blow. The primitive humans of Earth weren't newcomers to galactic civilization. They were the descendants of legendary mercenaries who had once been feared across the galaxy, and now they were back. Lieutenant Colonel Kim Ji-hoon, still standing in the ruins of the Draknari fortress, received a priority communication from Earth Command. Admiral Kim Tae-ho's face appeared on his display, looking tired but determined. "Colonel, I need your assessment of our current capabilities." "Sir, we've exceeded all expectations," Kim reported. "My forces have adapted to 17 different hostile environments, learned to operate captured alien equipment better than its original designers, and developed countermeasures for every weapon system the Draknari have deployed against us. And morale." Kim looked around at his soldiers, who were working efficiently to strip the alien fortress of anything useful. They moved with the confidence of people who had faced impossible odds and won. "Sir, my people are just getting started. Every defeat teaches us something new. Every victory makes us stronger. The Draknari think they're fighting a war, but we're treating this as advanced training. Admiral Kim smiled grimly. Excellent, because intelligence suggests that other species are starting to choose sides. We may be fighting more than just the Draknari soon. Good, Kim replied without hesitation. We could use the practice. As news of the ancient record spread throughout the galaxy, species began to understand the true scope of what they were facing. The humans weren't just winning through luck or primitive determination. They were demonstrating the same terrifying adaptability that had once made them legendary across the stars. The galaxy was beginning to remember why the elders had warned against waking, sleeping predators. The throne room of Emperor Grakthos lay in ruins, its crystal pillars cracked and smoking from the battle that had ended just hours before. The mighty ruler of the Draknari Empire sat hunched in his damaged throne, staring at the human officer who stood before him with calm confidence. General Seo Hyun-woo looked nothing like the monsters that Draknari propaganda had painted humans to be. She was small by galactic standards, barely reaching the chest of an average Draknari warrior, but her eyes held the cold certainty of someone who had never lost a battle that mattered. "Your empire is finished," she stated simply, her voice carrying clearly through the damaged throne room. "Your fleets are destroyed, your colonies are in rebellion, and your homeworld is under our control. Do you have anything to say?" Emperor Grakthos raised his scaled head, trying to maintain some dignity in defeat. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Seo replied. "Your empire attacked us. We defended ourselves. Now you face the consequences." The last transmission from Draktar went out across the galaxy on all frequencies. Emperor Grakthos, ruler of 17 star systems, formally surrendered to the human forces, but his final words would haunt the galaxy for years to come. "We thought we understood war," he said, his voice breaking. "We thought we knew what conquest meant. But these humans, they don't just defeat their enemies, they transform them. They make you part of their strength. Beware, galaxy. The elders tried to warn us, but we wouldn't listen. Now it's too late for all of us." The broadcast ended abruptly as human forces took control of the Imperial communication systems. Within weeks, human ships began appearing at the borders of other civilizations. They didn't come as conquerors, at least not openly. Instead, they arrived as protectors, offering security services and defense contracts to species who suddenly felt very vulnerable. Admiral Jung So-min commanded the Third Human Fleet as it approached the peaceful Ethereal Collective's home system. The Ethereals were ancient beings of pure energy who had never known war, never built weapons, never imagined they might need protection from anyone. "Ethereal Council," Jung's message was broadcast on all frequencies. "We come in peace." Recent events have shown that the galaxy can be a dangerous place for unprepared civilizations. The Human Federation offers our protection services. Our terms are quite reasonable. The Ethereal Council, beings who communicated through harmonic frequencies that most species couldn't even hear, found themselves facing an impossible choice. They had no military, no weapons, no way to defend themselves if the humans decided to take what they wanted by force. "What do you require in return?" the lead Ethereal asked, its voice like singing crystal. "Nothing unreasonable," Jung replied, smoothly. "A small portion of your energy production, some research cooperation, and the right to establish defense stations in your territory to better protect you from threats." It sounded almost fair, but the Ethereals weren't fools. They understood that accepting human protection meant accepting human control. But what choice did they have? The Draknari Empire's fate served as a clear example of what happened to species who opposed humanity. Dr. Lim Jae-young worked around the clock in her research facility aboard the station New Busan, analyzing the flood of alien technologies that human forces had captured during the war. Each new device, each alien computer system, each piece of advanced equipment revealed more secrets about how the galaxy's civilizations functioned. "Admiral Kim," she reported during her weekly briefing, "we've successfully reverse-engineered faster-than-light communication systems from 7 different species. More importantly, we've improved on their original designs. Our new communication networks are faster and more secure than anything else in the galaxy. Admiral Kim Tae-ho, now commanding the overall human expansion, nodded approvingly. What about their defensive technologies? Even better news, sir. We've learned to manufacture shield generators that are 60% more efficient than the original alien versions. Our weapons can now penetrate any known defensive system in the galaxy. The human technological advantage wasn't just about having better equipment, it was about their ability to learn, adapt, and improve on anything they encountered. While other species developed their technologies slowly over thousands of years, humans absorbed and perfected alien knowledge in months. Captain Oh Min-jung stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Soul's Pride, as her fleet approached the merchant world of Veltara Prime. Below them, the planet's surface glittered with vast trading cities, where species from across the galaxy came to buy and sell goods. "Sir," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the Veltarian Trade Council." "Put them through." A holographic image appeared, showing a serpentine alien with golden scales and intelligent eyes. "Human Commander, I am Trade Master Sekvala. We wish to discuss terms." Oh smiled. "The merchants always understood business better than warriors did. What kind of terms?" "We offer exclusive trading rights to human merchants, preferential pricing on all goods, access to our financial networks. In return, we ask only that you respect our neutrality and allow us to continue our operations." "Acceptable," O replied, "but we'll also need to station some ships here for security purposes. Recent events have shown that neutral worlds can be dangerous places." The Trademaster's expression didn't change, but O could see the defeat in his eyes. Another world had just accepted human dominance, disguised as a business partnership. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on hundreds of worlds. Species that had once considered themselves independent found themselves choosing between human protection and human conquest. It wasn't really a choice at all. In the depths of space, Elder Ketharos made his final appearance before what remained of the Galactic Council. Most species had already accepted human protection or been absorbed into the growing Human Federation. Only a handful of representatives remained to hear his last testimony. The ancient Zephyrian's crystal form was dim now, pulsing with the slow rhythm of approaching death. His people were gone, his world now under human administration, but he had one final truth to reveal. "I have found the oldest records," he said, his voice barely audible in the nearly empty chamber. "Archives from before the Great Wars, from the time when our galaxy first achieved interstellar civilization." The few remaining representatives leaned forward, desperate for any information that might help them understand what they were facing. "Humans were not mercenaries," Ketharos continued. "They were rulers. 50,000 years ago, they controlled the largest empire our galaxy had ever known. They commanded fleets that spanned from the galactic core to the outer rim. They built the hyperspace networks that we still use today. They established the trade routes that connected our civilizations. The implications hit the remaining council members like a physical blow. The advanced infrastructure of galactic civilization, the technologies that enabled interstellar trade and communication, the very foundations of their society had been built by humans. What happened to their empire?" asked one of the few remaining representatives. Ketharos's form pulsed with what his people called infinite sadness. "They grew tired of ruling. The records speak of humans who became disgusted with the brutality necessary to maintain their empire. They chose exile over conquest, isolating themselves on a remote world while their great civilization slowly crumbled without them. And now? Now they have returned," the elder said simply, "and they remember how to rule." As Captain Oh Min-jung's fleets moved from system to system, species across the galaxy finally understood the true meaning of the ancient warnings. The elders hadn't been trying to protect humanity from galactic civilization. They had been trying to protect the galaxy from humanity. But understanding came too late. The sleeping giants had awakened, and they were reclaiming an empire they had never truly abandoned. The galaxy belonged to humanity once again, just as it had 50,000 years before. The only difference was that this time they wouldn't choose exile when they grew tired of ruling. They had learned from that mistake.